particular secondary math at UC Davis. And before we get going, I just want to take a moment just to acknowledge there's lots of things going on in the world right now. So I hope all of you are well and joining us today from a safe space. I'd like to chat with you all about some ideas I have for student or for supervision and how to make students more the focal points of the work that we do as supervisors. My goal, I often start many of my presentations this way, and it is very true that my goal in all of the work that I do and in the presentations I give, and for us today, is to take steps outside of our comfort zone, because I really believe that's where a lot of the learning happens. And this is going to look different for all of us. For some of you here today, stepping outside of your comfort zone might mean that you're learning about things for the first time, and so you might entertain these things or try some of these things out in ways you might not have otherwise. So great, that would be an example of stepping outside of your comfort zone. For others, maybe some of these things that we're chatting about today are already things that you're familiar with, things you might even be doing. So stepping outside of your comfort zone might look different. Say, for example, encouraging colleagues to try some things out, or supporting colleagues as they work to try some of these things. Whatever stepping outside of your comfort zone looks like for you, most important is that you're going to be learning from it, and most importantly, your students will benefit from it. They'll be better off, and that, I'd argue, is perhaps the most important thing here. Here's my previous approach to supervision, which wasn't all that long ago. What you see on the screen now, hopefully, is just the form that I use in general when I'm doing my supervision work. So any classroom observation, this is more or less what I would use. And the process used to look something like this. So I would identify a focus for my visit. That can come from a variety of different places. It can come from me, and oftentimes I would try to select things that are recently discussed in methods classes. The focus could come from the student teacher, if that's something that the student teacher, for example, wants to work on. It could come from the mentor, resident, cooperating, whatever name you use, from the teacher who's housing the student teacher, mentoring the student teacher. It can come from them, or it can come from other places as well, or an amalgam of many of those things that I mentioned. Some examples of what I might look for is management. I think I saw that in the chat room. So how well is the teacher managing the students in the classroom? Student engagement. I'm secondary math, so one of the things I might look for is how well teachers are promoting procedural fluency. How are student teachers checking for understanding? How are they assessing their students? It's just some examples I could go on. But after I identify that focus, I go into the classroom and then I begin to take notes on what the teacher's doing and what the teacher is saying as it pertains to the focus. And then after that, I might write some comments, thoughts, wonders based on some of the things that I'm hearing the teacher do and some of the things that I'm hearing the teacher say. Again, all this pertains to whatever the focus is. So I try not to break too far off of what that focus is for the classroom visit. And then after taking notes, of course, the class is over. At some point in time, we'll have a debrief with the student teacher. And during that debrief, I'll do my best to capture the discussion that we have. And then I'll note any revisions in practice that I would encourage the student teacher to make, all as it pertains to whatever the focus was, suggestions about how to improve upon the work that they're already up to in class. So that was my previous approach to supervision. And just as an example, so let's say that I was looking at procedural fluency. So how are students using formulas, or how are teachers following algorithms in order to arrive at an answer? And so one of the things that we know from research in this field is that there are a couple of key ingredients to promoting procedural fluency. So if a teacher was doing their job and trying to promote procedural fluency, they'd have a very fast-paced lesson that would involve them modeling how to do the procedure. They'd ask a lot of low-order questions. In fact, the more the better. By low order, I just mean they could be answered with very short phrases like yes, no, or maybe a number. So what do I do when I multiply 5 plus 3, or 5 and 3, or what do I get when I don't know, add this to both sides? Those sorts of questions. What's the next step? There'd be minimal disruptions in the classroom, and then students would have an opportunity to practice. And importantly, there'd be minimal errors as part of that practice. So based on research, this is what I know that teachers should be doing if they're trying to promote procedural fluency. So when I go into the classroom, that's what I would be looking for. And I would take notes on how well or what the student teacher is up to and how they're doing those exactly that, how they're doing the modeling, how they're asking questions, how they are hopefully minimizing disruptions, and how they're offering time for practice. And then I'd write comments and so forth along those lines. And then our debrief would solely focus on how what the teacher was up to with regards to those particular things. And then I had an aha moment not too long ago. I was in a workshop, I guess is perhaps the best way to describe it. And this workshop involved a lot of different supervisors from across the UC system. And as part of this workshop, we were all asked to watch a video. And this is not the exact video, but the video went something like this. First, the teacher put up projected a problem for the students to think about. And they read, as a class, they read that particular problem. So that would be what was going on there. Then the teacher gave the students an opportunity to talk about the problem, not work on it, but just talk about it to make sure they understood what was going on. And then the teacher gave all the students an opportunity to work on the problem independently. They were sitting in groups, but at least from the video that I saw, many of them were working individually on this particular task. And that's, I think, the important thing I want to emphasize here is that at least from the video that we watched, all the students in this video range appeared to be working. And what I say by that is pencils were moving, eyes were looking down on the paper. It looked very much like they were engaged, if you will, as vague as that might seem. And that's all the evidence that we had to go on in that case. And now this in math is typically referred to as a launch. Which is to say that a teacher is launching the problem for students to work on. And the goal of any launch is to help students understand the problem. That's it, is that students should understand what they're being asked to do. And then after we watched this a couple of times, one of the questions that were posed in this workshop for all these supervisors is, okay, well, what sort of feedback would you give this particular teacher, if any? And then we took turns one by one. We went around the room, and all these supervisors had lots of great ideas, add more visuals, have students repeat the directions. And there's many good ideas. I myself was included in there. I'm thinking, okay, here's some things I might try differently or I might do. But I also had the benefit of being, I guess, on the back end of this moment. So I didn't answer right away. I had a chance to wait and hear a lot of other supervisors' suggestions about what they might ask. And there are a lot of great ideas. And the more I heard these ideas, all are very good, the more I began to wonder, well, yeah, there might be a lot of great ways to improve upon this teaching, but it doesn't seem necessary given that at the end of the video, all these students appear to be working, which is to say they seem to understand the problem because they had an opportunity to try and answer it. I don't know what those answers look like. Put another way, it seemed like everything we had to offer up was icing on the cake. It was extra bells and whistles to the work. It was, it might have been helpful, or it might have polished things up a little bit, but I wasn't convinced after a while that it was necessary. And I began to think about, well, maybe instead of exploring what the teacher is up to and focusing on what the teacher's doing, perhaps maybe I should be looking more at how those teacher actions are being received or not by his or her students. And so that was really my aha moment, that I spent probably more time than I should have focusing on the skills, the practices, the behaviors, the actions of the teacher, and making my recommendations based on that, when really some of that could have just been personal preference. And more importantly is that whether I do it this way and if someone else does it that way, if we're ultimately coming to the same conclusion or the same results, anything else maybe isn't as important to change. So I decided to abandon my previous approach. So everything I mentioned, I more or less started over with. And the reason I decided to is just because of what I mentioned. I was really focusing exclusively on teacher actions. And sort of looking past or backgrounding perhaps the most important people in this process, and that would be the students. Oh, sorry. So my new approach, I'm sorry, before I get there, sorry, that phone call threw me off. And this is really just, the point here is that this idea is not unique. It's not a novel one. There's been people who have been talking about this for a long time. And the most noteworthy, I think, or the most important that's kind of influenced my thinking along these lines is the student-centered coaching model, which was years back now. And the idea is simple. It's really more or less a formative assessment process as a way to look at this. You start by focusing on student work and data. And based on the student work or data, you use that information to make informed decisions about what you should do next. And any sort of curricula or teacher moves or practices are really just tools to achieve an objective. So rather than focus on the objective being teacher changing practices, we're really focused on trying to get the students to change. And the teacher can try a bunch of different things to affect that change, but they're just, again, a means to an end. The end now is not the teacher actions, it's the student actions. And in this case, as with some other supervision models as well, the coach, or in this case, the supervisor, is viewed really as a partner in trying to support the teacher to meet these learning objectives for his or her students. So here's what that means and what that looks like for me, for what it's worth. Same form as before, that didn't go away. But now one of the things I do, still looking for a focus. And I now look at the lesson plan beforehand. Actually, I always looked at the lesson plan, but I use the lesson plan more to identify what's going on in the lesson and to just see if some of those key ingredients, best practices, things the student teachers should be doing are there. And I also begin to think about what sort of data do I want to collect. So if I see things, key ingredients are missing, then I think about, okay, well, if that's not there, I have a hypothesis I think students might struggle or students might have trouble with, or there might be some disconnect. And so I want to look for some of that evidence when I go and supervise. And I begin to think about what sort of data I want to collect from students. And I'm not really focused on the teacher at all because I've looked at their lesson plan and I know what they have planned to do. And then when I show up in the classroom for my visits, I focus almost exclusively on the students. I take notes of what I'm seeing them do and what I'm hearing them talk about. Where it's appropriate, I sneak around, I take pictures of students' work and I embed that into the documents. I'll ask questions and do my best to try and write either verbatim or at least capture the sentiment of what they're saying and thinking in my notes. I also occasionally will make note of any teacher moves if they significantly differ from the lesson plan, but I'm really focusing a lot on what the students are up to, what they're saying, what they're doing, what they're thinking at that point in time. And then all my comments more or less are along those lines now. So I write comments about, wow, this student is talking about this, or these, I notice a pattern in students thinking here, or the wonders or the thoughts that I have. But now it's really focused more on what the students are doing and saying. Very little about what the teacher is up to. And then after we have our debrief, we analyze that student data, that student work, that student thinking, and come up with agreements or goals for future instruction and, more importantly, for student learning. So we have goals for student learning, and the agreement is the student teacher is going to try out some of these things as a hypothesis, thinking that if the student teacher tries these things out, we'll see a change in student learning here, and then we'll test out that hypothesis and see what happens. An example of what that might look like, so this I just grabbed from this year's notes. So back to the procedural fluency piece. So again, same key ingredients are important for procedural fluency, and rather than look for it in the actual lesson, I'm looking for that in the lesson plan. And seeing what's going on there. And then that's where I sort of stop focusing on the teacher after the lesson plan. And I think more about, okay, what sort of evidence do I want to collect? And in this case, you'll see from the notes that I'm taking, some of the things highlighted in yellow have a lot to do with student answers. So that was a lot of the data that I was collecting, was just the answers that students had, they were coming up with. And some of the things I highlighted were just to illustrate a pattern for that student teacher. A lot of my wonders and things, again, are really focused on the students in that pattern. And then as part of the debrief, we look at the student data. And that's really the focus of what we're talking about. And we use that student data to think about what that means for tomorrow, but also what that means beyond that day, for next week, for next month, for next unit, and for next observation, to be sure. Just a couple of notes, I would think, all anecdotal, but nevertheless, I've seen these over the years now that I've been using this model. One is that a lot of the conversations, feedback, suggestions that we have during the debrief seem more well received because we're focusing now on the students, not necessarily on the teacher and what the teacher's doing. I affectionately would refer to some teachers as yeah buts. You would have a debrief with them, you'd have some back and forth, and then maybe offer up some suggestions or things they might want to try, and they'd say, yeah, Matt, that all sounds good, but I'm not going to do them for these reasons. So I have very much less of that now, if any, because a lot of my student teachers know that I'm not really there for them. I'm there for students and their learning, and so I think they really buy into that, and don't really take as offense to things or feel as threatened, because it's really not about them. It's about the students and their learning. And another thing that I think is particularly useful with this sort of model is that student teachers don't grow dependent upon me or anyone, frankly, to identify areas of growth or things that they need to work on, because from the start of their student teaching, everything is focused on the students and their learning. So I found sometimes that I don't even need to, excuse me, offer up focus areas, because they come in and say, Matt, I've been collecting this data and I've noticed my students are struggling here, so I'd really like for you to focus on this for your next observation or for the next classroom visit. And that, I think, is very empowering, because then as they move on throughout their teaching career, they're not dependent upon a support provider, an administrator, or a coach for that matter. They're really able to identify things that they want to work on based on their students' needs, and then make changes as necessary. Noteworthy, student-centered and teacher-centered approaches aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. There are times when I will do a little bit of both in my observations, or the last bullet, sometimes this isn't necessarily a prescription. So there are some students where some more teacher-centered things are more helpful for the student teacher. And then there's sometimes when it's not. And so that's really something, once you get to know, for me anyways, once I get to know my student teachers, I identify what I think is going to be best for them. And then I'll adjust accordingly to really help support them. And then sometimes it's a mix. Sometimes it's really student-centered if hopefully that's the way we go down, but sometimes it's not. And that's okay too, if that's where the student teacher is. Also, not necessarily on preference, I should note, but more on student teacher need. There are some things where like classroom management, for example, I will focus a lot on how the teacher is reacting, responding, being proactive about certain things or not, to be sure. So I am going to go to the chat now and look at some of the things that you all mentioned. And I'd like to, if I may, I guess I'm the host, so I can do this. I was going to put some breakout rooms, or open some breakout rooms for all of you to chat about the following two questions and anything else that you might have, and then we can have some Q&A in about 5 or so minutes. So a couple of questions I have for all of you is, what ideas do you have, or what are you up to as far as student-centered supervision is concerned? And how do these ideas or practices reflect you stepping out of your comfort zone, if at all? So welcome back, everyone. One of the things I forgot to mention, and one of the things that I enjoy a lot in using this sort of model, is that the student level work and data is very helpful when it contradicts with the student teacher's thoughts, feelings, beliefs about any particular lesson. And it works both ways. Sometimes they're student teacher who's beating him or herself up, feeling the lesson went horribly. Gosh, I really didn't do this. I wanted to do that. And then we can look at the student data, and really we can see that their students were up to a lot of great things. And it really shows that sometimes you might pick yourself apart for one minor thing, or one student who was maybe making some poor decisions, and you miss out on a lot of the awesome things that were really happening in your classroom. It works the other way too, of course, when a student teacher comes in and feels like, wow, I was really firing on all cylinders, only to find that students really didn't take away a lot of what the teacher had hoped for. And so that, I think, is really a useful tool for those sorts of moments as well. I'd like to open up for questions, comments, and insights. I'd like to start with, so Bob sent me a private message. I hope, Bob, you don't mind me putting this up to all of us here. Bob is asking about how this changes now that we are in an online or distance learning environment. I have thought a lot about this and had some time to practice with it in spring quarter when we started all of this mess, although it's very, I think, a little different. That distance learning was very different from what hopefully our distance learning experiences will be in the fall. And some of the work will involve asking student teachers, since they're doing Zoom, to put me in breakout rooms if that's what they're using, so that I can, or make me a co-host so I can kind of bounce around from breakout room to breakout room to try and capture what students are up to. And I can do the same things there that I might in a regular classroom, which is to ask them questions or have them explain to me what they're thinking or what they're working on. There are other times where there's student work that I've missed out on because it's very easy as students are working to sort of look over their shoulder and see some of the work or their writing. That is gone from this, at least it has been. But there are other things that we're trying and I'm exploring as ways to go around that. But yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting moving forward and trying to think about what all of this means and what it looks like for our virtual teaching in the fall. Hopefully not too much longer than that. So questions, comments, insight?
Matt, hi, I'm Bethany. I'm from UCSB. I'm wondering, when you frame your relationship with your teaching candidates at the beginning of the year, like, how do you describe your job? Because something that sticks out to me from your presentation is how important it is that the candidates know your role and that you're not there to just give them a bunch of bells and whistles or tell them what they're not doing right, but that you're there to help them see their students. Do you have any ways of explaining that to them that have worked for you, or I guess worked for them in understanding your role?
Yeah, well, perhaps for me, the simplest way to put it is I just go in and say, I am an advocate for their students. I am there to make sure that the students get the best experience possible. And so I'm going to go in there and support them so that their students can get the most out of everything. And I try to let them know, and sometimes I'll say this jokingly, and other times I'll be a little bit more serious, but I do very much mean it. It's never really about them, and I think that's really true of all the teaching. It's not about us as teachers. It's always about our students, and so that's kind of how I frame the year and let them know that I mean, I care about them. I'm not trying to dismiss them or say that they're not important, but we're all in this to help. And for me, anyways, we're all in this to help some kids learn some math, and so that's really what this is all about, and hopefully trying to keep it just to thinking of it as that maybe calms them a little bit, and they look at me more as just trying to help them help some kids learn some math, as opposed to going in and critiquing or looking at the teacher.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Matt, this is Evelyn. Thank you for your presentation, by the way. I really enjoyed it. I totally agree with you. I think, you know, as supervisors, a lot of times we come in, 8 times during the during the 2 quarters, or 12 times, depending on where you are. And every time I go in, there seems to be like a dog and pony show, lots of bells and whistles, and they put in everything that they want us to see. But the thing that they're missing is, what do the kids get from their lesson? Yeah. And at some points in my supervision, I've had to say, I know what you know. I know that you know 5th grade math. I know that you know world civilization and whatnot. I want to know what the kids know based on what you have taught them.
Right.
And I really appreciate your focus on the student-centered supervision, because I did what you did for years and years, and which was just to take copious notes, you know, about what they did, what the student teachers did, as opposed to what the students did. And then this year we shifted to TPE, centered supervision. But even as we're doing that, I'm finding that I'm looking at what the student teachers are doing, or whether or not they're meeting TPEs, and I have to really shift toward how are they meeting their TPEs through student learning.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think it's a great way to think about it, to be sure. And thank you for that. Yeah. So it was in my journey, I was appreciative of that aha moment and felt like, gosh, this is so silly. I mean, I felt I'm an assessment person. That's what I've done a lot of work and thinking behind, and I don't know why it didn't dawn on me much earlier that really it's the proof is in the pudding, as my grandmother used to say. And so, yeah, you're right. You can do a lot of great things up there, and sometimes student teachers do look great trying out some of these things. But if it's not well received, then what is it? It's not really doing much, for sure. For sure. So we have about 7 minutes left.
And I
Any
have
other
a question.
Yeah.
Something that came up in my name's Mary. Something that came up in our chat session, and I'm curious about is very often student teachers, certainly at the beginning, and one of our colleagues mentioned even at the end of the student teaching, they have a single focus lens and it's all about them. And when you call the student teacher's attention to the student response or lack of response, that gives them insight into that particular student on that particular day. How do you encourage the student teachers to then assume that responsibility themselves? In other words, one of the goals, of course, is to get the student teacher to realize that it is all about the student, and unless you know what they're doing and what they're not doing and how well they're doing it, that should be your diagnosis set for how and what you're going to teach in the future. But how do you get the student teacher? They're so scattered, they have so much going on in their head, and like someone said, they're trying to do a dog and pony show and impress us. And how do you get them to slow down and focus on the students themselves? Because we're only there 8 times a year, and this is something we want to train them to do on a regular basis.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting you bring that up. One of my challenges, actually, for what it's worth, is I think so. In my experience, student teachers will really take up the notion of looking at their students. I mean, it's a transition, to be sure. I think all of us as teachers come in. In fact, I think this is even true in the research that this journey starts looking inward, and then over time you begin to look outward as your students. And that journey is faster or slower depending on who these student teachers are. But I found that along that journey, just in the credential year, student teachers get to a place where they are looking at the students. My challenge has been some of them just aren't interested in doing anything about it. So they could sit there and tell me, yeah, Matt, I know that the student in the corner didn't say anything today or wasn't engaged, or I know that I responded negatively here, or I know that I wasn't getting this from these students. So great, they're aware of it, but they just don't want to do anything about it. And so that's been a challenge for me. So I don't know if it's just because of the approach that I have going in, and one, alerting them that I'm looking at the students all the time, and really in all the 8 visits, being true to that, and showing the data and looking through the data and having them do that. That's something that they embrace or take up anyways. Yeah, so I can say that hasn't really been the challenge for me, and maybe it's just because of I do this so much. But I am still, there are some student teachers who are reluctant to really make some of those changes in meaningful ways, I would say, because some of them will take up some of the things that we might talk about just to say that, yeah, man, I'm doing it. But again, it's, if it's disingenuous, the things that they're doing, it doesn't really play out in terms of the student data, and we see that. And so that still becomes the goal or the challenge for the student teacher.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, for what it's worth, I've found that it's maybe just because you do it for all 8 sessions that they sort of pick up on that and embrace that idea too. And if you figure out how to help get some of these more reluctant student teachers to really use the data to make informed changes, please let me know, because that's one of the primary challenges I face with some of the, particularly with some of the student teachers who come in already locked in on what kind of teacher they want to be.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Matt.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.